Hello there, guys. Back with another brand new episode of Pride and Prejudice, Chapter 8. At 5 o'clock, the two ladies retired to dress, and at 6:30, Elizabeth was summoned to dinner to the civil inquiries, which then poured in, and amongst which she had the pleasure of distinguishing at the much superior solicitude of Mr. Bentley's. She could not make a very favorable answer. Jane was by no means better. The sisters, on hearing this, repeated 3 or 5 times how much they were grieved, how shocking it was to have a bad cold, how excessively they disliked being ill each other, and then thought no more of the matter, and their indifference towards Jane, when not immediately before them, restored Elizabeth to the enjoyment of all her original dislike. Their brother, indeed, was the only one of the party whom she could regard with any complacency. His anxiety for Jane was evident, and his attentions to her most pleasing, and they prevented her feeling herself so much intruder as she believed she was considered by the others. She had very little notice from any but him. Miss Bingley was engrossed by Mr. Darcy, her sister scarcely less so. And as for Mr. Hurst, by whom Elizabeth sat, he was an indolent man who lived only to eat, drink, and play cards, who, when he found her prefer a plain dish to a ragout, had nothing to say to her. When dinner was over, she returned directly to Jane, and Mrs. Bingley began abusing her as soon as she was out of the room. Her manners were pronounced to be very bad indeed, a mixture of pride and impertinence. She had no conversation, no style, no taste, no beauty. Mr. Hurst thought the same, and added, "She has nothing in short to recommend her, but being an excellent walker. I shall never forget her appearance this morning. She really looked almost wild." "She did indeed, Lucia. I could hardly keep my countenance very nonsensical to come at all. Why must she be scampering about the country because her sister had a cold? Her hair so untidy, so blousy. Yes, and her petticoat. I hope you saw her petticoat. 6 inches deep in mud, I am absolutely certain, and a gown which had been let down to hide it, not doing its office. Your picture may be very exact, Lucia," said Mr. Bingley, "but this was all lost upon me. I thought Mrs. Elizabeth Bennet looked remarkably well when she came into the room this morning. Her dirty petticoat quite escaped my notice." "You observed it, Mr. Darcy, I'm sure," said Mrs. Bingley, "and I am inclined to think that you would not wish to see your sister make such an exhibition. Certainly not. To walk 3 miles, or 4 miles, or 5 miles, or whatever it is, above her ankles in dirt, and alone, quite alone. What could she mean by that? It seems to me to show an abominable sort of conceited independence, a most country town indifference to decorum. It shows an affection for her sister that is very pleasing, said Mr. Bingley. I am afraid, Mr. Darcy, observed Miss Bingley, in a half whisper, that this adventure has rather affected your admiration her fine eyes. Not at all, he replied. They were brightened by the exercise. A short pause followed the speech, and Mrs. Hurst began again. I have an excessive regard for Jane Bennet. She is really a very sweet girl, and I wish with all my heart that she were well settled. But with such a father and mother and such a low connections, I'm afraid there's no chance of it. I think I have heard you said that their uncle is an attorney in Marton. Yes, and they have another, who lives somewhere near Cheapside. That is a capital, added her sister, and they both laughed heartily. If they had uncles enough to fill all Cheapside, cried Bingley, it would not make them one jot less agreeable. But it must very materially lessen their chance of marrying men of any consideration in the world, replied Darcy. To this speech, Bingley made no answer, but his sisters gave it their hearty assent, and indulged their mirth for some time at the expense of their dear friend's vulgar relations. With a renewal of tenderness, however, they repaired to her room on leaving the dining parlour, and sat with her until summoned to coffee. She was still very poorly, and Elizabeth would not quit her at all, till late in the evening, when she had the comfort of seeing her asleep, and when it appeared to her rather right than pleasant that she should go downstairs herself. On entering the drawing-room, she found the whole party at loo, and was immediately invited to join them, but suspecting them to be playing high, she declined it, and making her sister the excuse, said she would amuse herself for the short time she could stay below with a book. Mr. Hurst looked at her with astonishment. Do you prefer reading to cards? Said he. That is rather singular. Miss Elsa Bennet, said Miss Bingley, despises cards. She is a great reader and has no pleasure in anything else. I deserve neither such praise nor such censure, cried Elizabeth. I am not a great reader, and I have a pleasure in many things. In nursing your sister, I'm sure you have pleasure, said Mr. Bingley, and I hope it will soon be increased by seeing her quite well. Elizabeth thanked him from her heart, and then walked towards a table where a few books were lying. He immediately offered to fetch her others, all that his library afforded. And I wish my collection were larger for your benefits and my own credits. But I am an idle fellow, and though I have not many, I have more than I ever looked into. Elizabeth assured him that she could suit herself perfectly with those in the room. I am astonished, said Miss Bingley, that my father should have left so small a collection of books. What a delightful library you have at Pemberley, Mr. Darcy. It ought to be good, he replied. It has been the work of many generations. And then you have added so much to it yourself. You are always buying books. I cannot comprehend the neglect of a family library in such days as these. Neglect? I'm sure you neglect nothing that you can add to the beauties of the noble place. Charles, when you build your house, I wish it might be half as delightful as Pemberley. I wish it may. That's not fully yet, but I will continue it tomorrow. Stay tuned and we'll continue it tomorrow. Bye.